Welcome to the Clarify It. What did Slovak Foreign Minister Juraj Blanár discuss with his Russian counterpart Sergey Lavrov? How does the Slovak diplomacy and the Slovak citizens perceive the interruption of the joint negotiations between the Czech and Slovak governments? Will Slovakia become a logistical route to Ukraine for EU troops and weapons, as Prime Minister Fico fears? Who wants to break up the V4, which the Czech Minister for European Affairs claims is toxic? And can Saturday's presidential election in Slovakia change the course of a country whose government has the slogan Slovakia First in its program statement? We will talk about that today, too. A prominent politician has accepted the invitation. Mr. Juraj Blanár, a long-serving member of the National Council of the Slovak Republic, former Czechoslovak athletics champion, chairman of the ruling SMER party, and currently Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of the Slovak Republic. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for the invitation.
Minister, you attended the meeting of the foreign ministers of the V4 countries in Prague this morning. This is your first trip to Prague after the Czech government made a decision to suspend the negotiations or joint negotiations between the governments from the Czech Republic and Slovakia because of differences of opinion on the conflict in Ukraine. I would just like to point out that according to the Slovak government statement, Slovakia considers Czechoslovak relations to be highly superior, and it is precisely in its government statement that the Fico government draws attention to this. I would be interested to know how you view this disruption in the light of this Slovak-Czech relationship.
You know, Madam Editor, I still don't understand why this drop was made by the Czech Republic, because our relations are so unique, family-like, friendly, but also economic, because it is not easy to forget and not to break. And it's all the more strange in that this was done on the basis that this is not a problem between us, the Czech and Slovak republics, but because we have a different opinion on some other issue or some other way of doing things abroad. And today, after the meeting in the V4, I have to say that it looks as if nothing has been done. There is no isolation. We have debated and discussed. It's interesting that we are discussing common themes that we share. And in this context, we really see it as incomprehensible what the Czech party would be. But you rightly mentioned that we are suspected that there was some interest in worsening Slovak-Czech relations. Therefore, we took the trouble to put in our program a government statement also stating that these relations are so unique that we will do everything to ensure that no one disturbs them, but on the contrary, we will still want to try to develop these relations generationally, and that's what we insist on and will continue to do in the future.
You know, we are in a unique situation here. You are a diplomat, and we are witnessing a situation where nothing has happened between two countries. I mean, between the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic. But they were divided by the relationship to a third party. How do you look at this as a diplomat?
What I described in a sentence, it's incomprehensible because most of the time it's based on bilateral issues. We had a problem with our southern neighbor Hungary, that we had a lot of tensions, then we cleared it up, and today we have very good relations. And now it's only because we have a different view of what's going on in Ukraine, but even that opinion is not completely different because we agree on many things. We agree that what has been done is a violation of international law by the Russian Federation. We agree on this, and we have already spoken about this in the case of the occupation of Crimea. We agree that we want Ukraine to be a democratic and sovereign country within their recognized borders. Respect for international law is the strongest thing for us. A weapon to protect us because it can protect us in some way. We just have a different perspective on it. How this conflict should end and how it should blow over. We have said that we will no longer supply weapons from our depots because we do not even have any more to give, and it has a significant impact on our economy. At the same time, we said that that after 2 years, seeing how this is developing, it has no military solutions, and that is why we are calling for measurement solutions to come from the EU level, because it was the EU that was once based on measurement. This is our position, but how the Czech Republic has a different position, or the Republic of Poland, we respect that. As they have decided that they want to achieve the measure in a different way, we respect that, but that cannot somehow divide us. And then there was reservation that I clashed with Minister Lavrov. I was on the Antalya Diplomatic Forum, where I was invited by President Erdogan, and still on my opposite, the foreign minister, but he invited Mr. Lavrov there as well, and Mr. Lavrov asked for a bilateral meeting with me. So I accepted because, first of all, I had the opportunity to be able to communicate to Mr. Lavrov our position on the conflict. So all the things that I took about, I told him, but at the same time, I had the opportunity, and this is important for the sovereign representation of our interests, to address what we have in common, and we have to make it happen. And that is the supply of gas and nuclear fuel, because these two commodities are on the sanctions list. So all of this is what I was looking forward to, because we have to communicate in diplomacy with those who may have a different opinion. And this was a problem for my colleagues, but they did not mind that Antony Blinken, the foreign minister, clashed with Mrs. Lavrov last year at G20, and that the foreign minister of Turkey clashed with Mrs. Lavrov, and yet we are in the same NATO alliance. And two more bizarre things. One last thing, Mrs. Bobošíková, that I was thinking about. That then in the Antalya Forum, Mr. Zelensky came to visit to Turkey at the invitation of President Erdogan. So Mr. Zelensky, why else did he go to the country that invited Mr. Lavrov? And another bizarre thing, that we're going to have an April 11th of the Ukrainian and Slovak governments in Mikaluchi. This is the second one, because the first one was in Uzhhorod. So the Ukrainian side is approaching this pragmatically, and yet the Czech side and the Polish side were bothered that we had a different attitude and that we clashed with Mrs. Lavrov. So, in my opinion, it is unfortunate, and we want to forget about it as soon as possible. We want to resolve the things that are hurting us.
I will pause for a moment on your interview with the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, Mr. Lavrov. I would just like to repeat, you said Turkish Antalya. It may be lost among the many words and the emotional statements, but Turkey is a member of the North Atlantic Alliance, which means that Turkey is an ally of the Czech Republic, Turkey is an ally of Slovakia, Germany, and other countries. And this Turkey has invited Russia to this diplomatic forum. Yet it is not being excluded, it is not being labeled, nothing is happening towards it at that international level, but rather I have not noticed anything like that, so I just took the liberty of adding to what you said when you talk about the absurdity of the situation. However, the meeting did attract a lot of attention, and we looked at the press service of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, which also referred to it, and it says there was an exchange of views on the most pressing issues on the international agenda, including the situation around Ukraine. The Russian side confirmed its readiness to resume relations with Slovakia on an interparliamentary level in the cultural, humanitarian, and military spheres. May I ask, Minister, what did Sergey Lavrov say to you when you conveyed to him the opinion of Slovak diplomacy on the situation in Ukraine?
Minister Lavrov reiterated our position, which I have already repeated, that this is a violation of international law, and that we call for, because it's not warlike in our opinion. And at the same time, I told him that we would support any peace initiative that comes from whoever, but we also supported Mr. Zelensky's peace initiative, which should be to be discussed under Swiss leadership as agreed in Davos. And I wanted to get his opinion on how he looks at it. So he explained one thing that is common knowledge. He confirmed that it was very close to the peace negotiations, and it was just about a messiad after the opening of Imazia, where the meeting was mediated. Peace talks from the level of Mr. Bennett, the then Israel Prime Minister, and it was mediated by the Turkish side, where they had already come to some agreement. But Boris Johnson, the then Prime Minister of Great Britain, and he said, I will not support this, and it's over. He also said that any peace deal that was made without them being there, that they would not respect it. I, for one, said that we must clash and we must negotiate. Well, and that is the most important thing that we have listed in terms of the measure and the message, because we need to be open about what we think. I don't think the clash makes much sense, except from that perspective, because many opposition politicians have a simple rhetoric and says you call Putin, you tell him to stop the war. If it was simple, they can call her too, but you have to eat and negotiate with both sides. Scientists say that, for example, if we want to find some sort of peace settlement in Gaza, which is now taking place, we have to negotiate with Hamas as well. For example, he did something that is unfixable, but we have to find some sort of resolution to prevent unnecessary howling, and that is our position.
Minister, you may be the only, or at least one of the few senior officials of a European Union country who has spoken to the Russian foreign minister recently. I think there was perhaps the Hungarian foreign minister that he also spoke to the Russian, say, sent, perhaps your mediator, and please do not take this the wrong way, but did Minister Lavrov send any message or say anything that other foreign ministers in the European Union should know?
I think the message, or what he said, is that they are ready for the peace talks, but they have not yet been invited to attend any. So it is clear enough that they are interested in these negotiations, but they have a different view of how to approach them. He talked about nearly a dozen peace initiatives, which he also said are some classified, and that it is all being negotiated and they are watching it. So I was just respectfully suggesting that our position is that this is the best way to get to some sort of resolution on the measure and stop the needless killing, because not knowing it's going to some end, which would be that the Ukrainians will push out the Russian Federation and that all will be won, because that's not happening. On the contrary, take the fact that that invasion and that offensive by the Ukrainians turned out basically against Ukraine, and that may have even worse consequences for Ukraine as it doesn't start negotiating, perhaps brilliantly. And again, mostly this is not just Slovakia's position. But experts are talking about it today. Even a senior US military official, Mark Milley, a member of actually the top leadership of the military, Pope Francis has already communicated something. So in my opinion, this is the only way that our government is also advocating, is to push both sides towards a peaceful solution and let the negotiations go on for years, than to have tens of thousands more government men and civilians die needlessly.
We are members of the European Union, and there are different views within the European Union on how the conflict in Ukraine should continue. There are even countries such as France, where the president is talking about perhaps French troops fighting in Ukraine. Prime Minister Fico, in an interview this week, said that he was worried and that he did not want Slovakia to become a transit country for military logistics heading to Ukraine. What is your perception, say, the various forces that are now overlapping in terms of how the conflict in Ukraine should develop?
This is a very, I would say, sensitive and difficult question, because I don't want to offend any partners, but I have sometimes feel in these negotiations as if some countries have reached an impasse by the activities that they have done so far, because French position 2 years ago was completely different and much more difficult than now, when President Macron even admitted that troops from NATO member countries could be sent to Ukraine, and it does not matter whether they are there to train or whether they are there to do some support activities, to operate some systems. In other words, for the Russian Federation, it will be engaging in a military conflict. And it wasn't just him, it was even admitted by my colleague, Mr. Sikorski, the foreign minister of Poland, who said during some discussion that it was unthinkable that a soldier of these countries could eat there. We will refuse. And we clearly say that this is something that can escalate the whole conflict. That is why we have not taken part in any further negotiations with those countries willing to consider that this could also be done, because we think that this is a very dangerous game, because we have Article 5. And in the event that any country could be, and now I don't know for what reason, that it was involved in the war in Ukraine, attacked by the Russian Federation, purely in theory, we are all responsible because we have to protect it under Article 5. So this is a dangerous game that we have condemned in advance, that it is not the way to go. And as you talked about, that we wouldn't want to be the ones to ship weapons to Ukraine, but we have a bit of a problem with the fact that the previous government adopted a very unbalanced defense of the treaty behind the United States, where, for example, we don't even have the ability to control what the military brings in. They can inform us, but we have no right to control it. And that's where we have a very narrow space. That is not to say that we don't trust our partner, but, as it is in a good partnership, double check and verify. And these are the limits that we have today, and therefore we have to work with that. And our effort to gradually open up with our partners the individual issues of this treaty as well, and at least balance them as they have in other countries. The Czech Republic, for example, as far as I am aware, has negotiated something completely different in the area of jurisdiction. The Norwegians, for example, have negotiated that it is explicitly stated that no nuclear weapons will be deployed on Norwegian territory, and we can go ahead and do that. So these are things that are in front of us, and we have to work with them.
You have already mentioned that there will be a joint meeting of the Slovak and Ukrainian governments in Michalovce. What will be discussed there?
We have said that we want to help Ukraine, especially in humanitarian terms and in the area of non-lethal systems, that is, for example, demining, where the Slovak Republic is very strong. Because on the one hand, our ceremonial industry produces these demining systems. By the way, they have already donated several of them to me. The last two I signed a few months ago, which I am going to demine in the Hertz area. But we also want to help in other areas that are important, and that was just brought up at that first meeting in Užhorod, which were still announced this year. And now there will be a second meeting on the Slovak side where we want to develop those specific projects. Among those projects are, first of all, energy interconnection. Because if Ukraine has a big problem today, it is with electricity. And if we can help it, we must have a sufficiently strong interconnection capacity. So that is one area. Another area is that we want to connect Kiev with Košice so that they can travel, but at the same time we are ready to help them in the reconstruction of Ukraine through the broad gauge railway that we have to Košice. The other important thing is that we want to expand the border crossing on the higher German side, to double it so that it is ready in terms of capacity for what we are going to have together in the reconstruction of Ukraine, and then many even smaller projects that we want to help them with. But at the same time, we've also helped there with humanitarian aid. We have sent material there in some quantity in winterization. So this is our contribution that we are giving to help Ukraine, and we want to continue to do that. That contribution is not small. When you take it with the weapons that have been given there, it is almost 0.7% of GDP. It is more, by the way, than the Czech Republic. It is at the level of the Republic of Poland. I think from this point of view, everyone can see that we, Ukraine, want to help Ukraine because it is a country that has been invaded, but we have a different view on how to settle it.
One more thing about the relationship with the Russian Federation. We also found information at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. Quote, "We are grateful for the invitation on behalf of Robert Fico, a descendant of the participants in the Slovak National Uprising, to attend the ceremony on the 80th anniversary of that event in Stop in 2024. The Russian President Vladimir Putin said that this was a humane gesture, which we very much appreciate.
Again, madam, this is one of the things that we are absolutely consistent. Just because of the fact that what happened then in relation to Ukraine, we cannot dismiss the fact that we were liberated by the Red Army together with the Royal Romanian Army and the other nationalities that were present or present during the Slovak national uprising, the French, the Czechs, and so on. We can name those people, the soldiers who gave their lives for the fact that it can't happen. But, in Slovakia, suddenly there is a problem. Even Slavin himself, a great commemorator of the liberation of Slovakia, but also of Bratislava, has been painted, dishonored, and so on. We will refuse this. And that's why we offered, on the occasion of a great holiday for Slovakia and the Republic, which is the 80th anniversary of the outbreak of the Slovak national uprising. This was one of the biggest uprisings in those days against Nazi Germany, and it is an icon for us, and it is one of the most important in modern history, and it was one of the most important, that we will invite a descendant of those who fought in the liberation of the Slovak Republic or Czechoslovakia. Because we think that it is necessary to keep on reporting to the people, but at the same time to show that war is the greatest evil of the people. That it is always necessary to do, and just in diplomacy, everything, because so that there will never be a war.
And at what level, Minister, are Slovak-Russian diplomatic relations now?
We, like other countries, still have a diplomatic level, i.e. none of us has cancelled diplomatic relations, neither from the EU countries nor from the RF. And the only new thing that has been done from our side is that the Minister of Culture, according to the way we have approached it, and we have approached it, has opened up the possibility that we will continue some cultural exchanges and some cultural cooperation, because the cultural workers are not to blame for what was done, just as the sports people are not to blame for what has been done. And moreover, there was also such a double standard used in the violation of international law, and we're consistent about that. We are condemned international law when it was violated in the case of the attack on Iraq. And it's our alliance partner, one of the most important ones, but which we haven't heard that American athletes have been banned from participating in the Olympic Games or the World Championships in hockey or anything else. If it becomes a violation of international law for somebody else, that's something else entirely. We reject this double standard. We cannot look at a violation of international law, that it is okay if the good guy does it, but the bad guy, if he does it, it is not okay. So that is why our approach is that we do not want to see, when the war is over here, that the war has to end. And I firmly believe that diplomatically, as soon as possible, the Iron Curtain will be created again. And we'll have to pretend that Russia doesn't exist here. Russia and Ukraine will remain here, and we and the European Union must find some way of communicating with each other, even if it is, I do not know, difficult.
We mentioned at the beginning that you attended the meeting of the foreign ministers of the V4. You said that the meeting was cordial, as if nothing had happened at all. I understood correctly from your words what the atmosphere was like there?
First of all, we had planned to have only 15 minutes for 8 eyes. And in the end, it turned out that we had about an hour of discussion together. And I appreciate that immensely, because we had the opportunity to be very open and discuss all the topics that we had collected up to that point. And even the ones where we differed, so that we had the opportunity to exchange our differences. And I appreciate that, because I don't like to beat around the bush, and I like to go downtown to explain things to each other. We have some divided views, so we could explain. And that's what was done, and I appreciate that very much, because we've cheered up the fact that we have a split view, we agree on a lot of things, but at the same time we want to work together and we respect each other's differences. And I think that is the role of diplomacy.
Minister, what do you think is the future of the V4? I will just mention for the audience that the Slovak government, in its government statement, attaches really great importance to it, whereas the Czech government, in its government statement, has been far more lukewarm towards the V4. And even the Minister for European Affairs, which is in a way your counterpart, even the Minister for European Affairs in our country is divided. The Minister for European Affairs in our country has said that the V4 is toxic. Prime Minister Fico said that he felt when he was in Prague 3 weeks ago that there was an attempt to break up the V4. So what is the V4 now?
Well, and who felt the Minister for European Affairs, Mr. Dvorak?
Dvorak, yes.
He probably had some reasons on it, but I'm happy to answer them. Because the V4 is a unique project that was created 33 years ago, and it should matter to the Czech party, because as far as I know, it was created in Prague with the participation of the then President Havel as the V3, and then it split into the V4 after the division of Czechoslovakia. And the V4 managed to gain respect, but at the same time it has also had successes. There have already been attempts to expand the V4. The Slovenians were very interested. Austria had a great interest. We never made it, we just made it comfortable if we made the V4 +1 or +2 negotiations, because we think we still have many common themes that bind us together. And today we can talk about one topic that has absolutely spontaneously arisen, that is, for example, illegal migration and the Migration Pact, which is currently being approved at EU level. You know that it is already going to the EP. We have basically rejected it there in unison, and we can go on with many other topics. Strengthening our balances, preparing for what the future holds for mobility, electromobility and so on. That means, I see it this way, that the V4 are irreplaceable and has its respect. Regardless of the fact that we have some divisions here, they cannot divide us in what unites us. And this is how we have approached it and why we have put it in the program of the declaration and the government. Because we see that if we act as a united whole, representing 64 million inhabitants, we will be more respected. And just at the time, Madam Editor, when there are attempts, for example, to abolish the right of veto, because the Migration Act, for example, has already been approved by a qualified majority, because the right of veto has already been repealed in this area, but there are still right of veto in foreign policy, in enlargement, in taxation, and others that we do not want to repeal. And today we have agreed that all countries are equally in favor of this in the quarter, that we do not want to abolish veto. So the format is very important in the neighborhood and beneficial to all.
You know, in our country, some journalists, but also some politicians are starting to portray V4 as two blocks, as
like
V2 plus V2. Is that a perception that you would identify with, or is it different?
No, I'm used to that. As a minister, I'm exposed to the media's guesswork, the political science team, explanations, you know, but at the end of the day, it's different anyway. Political scientists have an idea, but politicians know what to do. There's no division into V2 plus V2O, in my opinion. I felt that today. It was open, very accommodating, and sometimes really tough discussions to go through. But at the end of the day, we understood each other, and that is what is important even before diplomacy, because I represent diplomacy, and I say, if we don't discuss, we can't find and come to a diplomatic solution. And if we don't find a diplomatic solution, then we can't resolve conflicts, and we can't even stop some wars. So that's our role.
Minister, I promised the audience one more topic, namely the presidential elections in Slovakia, which will start in 2 days. The presidential elections start on Saturday. The government is supporting the candidacy of the Speaker of the Slovak Parliament, Mr. Pellegrini, and his opposition is supporting the former Foreign Minister, Mr. Ivan Korčok. Do you sense any foreign efforts to interfere in any way in the Slovak head of state election?
Well, if I'm going to be so blunt, I will say that the attempt to abolish and de facto make it a joint negotiation between the Czech and Slovak governments appear to interfere in the presidential elections, because immediately afterwards the president of the government, Mr. Fiala, received the leader of the opposition, Mr. Šimečka. As if it had been planned, he is supporting Mr. Korčok and the entire opposition in his candidacy. I could go on and on about other things, that there was supposed to be or was held a conference which was supposed to address the political situation in Slovakia, represented by all the ambassadors of the European Union, with the exception of our ambassador. I could go on and on. This showed signs that it might interfere with the campaign. We will reject this. We respect the decision of the people of whichever country they choose and whoever they choose, and we want that to be respected, and it's the other way around. The Slovak Republic is a sovereign state, and the citizens of the Slovak Republic choose and elect the best they want in democratic elections.
I would be interested to know what the election of Peter Pellegrini, a candidate close to the ruling coalition, would mean for
Yes,
Slovakia. And what would the election of Ivan Korčok mean? I am asking for two reasons. Firstly, because according to the Slovak constitution, the president negotiates and ratifies international treaties. And then, when there are differences of opinion between the president and the government, it can be strange. And also because in your government declaration, you have a slogan like Slovak Republic First. So would both candidates behave in a viable way in this respect? You live there, you know their campaigns, you know how they perform.
Yes, I believe that in the case of Mr. Pellegrini, the chairman and also of our coalition party, the Voice of Social Democracy, we can expect him to represent the interests of the Slovak Republic in the first place. However, with Mr. Korčok, I am not at all sure. And in many cases, at a time when we were looking forward the as yet unexplained death of our citizen at the airport in Brussels, I am sure you have heard from Mr. Chovanec, Mr. Korčok was not interested in his interests, but he was interested in who would be the recognized leader in Venezuela, Mr. Guaido. It was only when we pointed that out to me that he became active. I could go on to other topics where, for example, he himself has admitted that the right of veto should be abolished. This means that he wants to weaken the sovereignty of the Slovak Republic in his own way. So with Mr. Korčok, I am not at all sure that he would be one who would represent the people, despite the fact that he tries to present himself in the campaign as representing the people. The experience we have is the opposite. With Mr. Pellegrini, I am convinced that he is a person who will first and foremost represent the interests of the citizens of the Slovak Republic, because that is what we were elected to do. But at the same time, we will try and fulfill our obligations as members of the EU, NATO, and so on. But if we see that something is not going well, as was the case, for example, with Mr. Macron's initiative from the NATO level, because all EU member states are also NATO members, except for Austria and Ireland, we will come and say that this is not good, and this is the sovereign position. Whereas in the past, Mr. Korčok always kicked the balls and agreed on everything. One example for all, I'm sure you have caught it now, we have managed to distribute, that is to say, to pump out the letter of the sanctioned citizen of the Slovak Republic, Mr. Hambalk, because there was given absolutely contrary to all the rules. It was just a political decision supported by Mr. Korčok. At that time, Mr. Korčok had only to say that this citizen of the Slovak Republic did not belong there and would not be listed, because the list had to be approved consistently, that is, unanimously. He was not interested in the fact that this citizen was the only one from the European Union who was absolutely wrong to be there, just because he likes to ride a motorbike and walked around with so-called Russian boots on all the memorials in Slovakia, paying tribute to the fallen soldiers of the Red Army. This is also a sure example of Mr. Korčok's actions.
Do you have any guesses as to how the election will turn out?
My guess is that Mr. Pellegrini will win. That Mr. Pellegrini wins in the first round, and I firmly believe in the second round, because people have had enough experiments in Slovakia. We have survived 2 experiments, and I am going to be politically incorrect, but I have to say it, because sometimes political correctness is useless. The experiment with Mr. Kiska failed. Finally, the sentence that Mr. Kiska, facing a court hearing, has already been condemned once. He has appealed. When we pointed this out, everyone criticized us. It turned out to be true, at least so far, according to the trial court. On Mrs. President Chaputova is an experiment anyway, which turned out not to be good because Mrs. President failed to represent for the Union of Slovaks, whether during the pandemic or even during the conflict in Ukraine. because we called on her, for example, to take the DCA from the mule to the Constitutional Court. She herself, during the election campaign, when she was asked whether she would sign a defense of the mule with the US, said that she would not. Then she signed without any problems. So this experiment has proven not to be good. And the proof of that is that both of them didn't run a second time, because if they were sure they were going to win, they would have run. And that's why you need an experienced politician who's been there before. And people can appreciate that. A person who has political experience, these two, I didn't have that political experience.
Minister, I thank you for the interview.
I thank you for inviting me.